The night the hospital called him, Armin was standing in a dimly lit kitchen counting coins on the table again. His fingers trembled not from the cold, but from the quiet terror of not having enough. Not enough for rent, not enough for food, not enough for food, not enough for his daughter's medicine. And just when he thought life couldn't push him any further, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize and a decision that would change everything. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that even the smallest act can change a life forever, take a moment right now to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories. Armin was a single father, a man shaped by hardship and held together by love. Ever since his wife passed away 3 years ago, he had become both mother and father to his 6-year-old daughter, Mira. She was his world, his reason to keep going when everything else seemed to fall apart. But life had not been kind to them. Armin worked long shifts as a construction laborer, often returning home exhausted, his body aching, but his heart still determined. Yet no matter how hard he worked, it never seemed to be enough. Their small apartment was barely furnished, with peeling paint and a constant leak in the corner during rainy nights. Still, Mira never complained. She would greet him every evening with a smile that somehow erased the weight of his day. But lately, even that smile had begun to fade. Mira had been sick, weak, pale, and constantly tired. The doctor had prescribed medication that Armin could barely afford, and every missed dose felt like a failure pressing down on his chest. That night, when the phone rang, Armin almost ignored it. Unknown numbers rarely brought good news. But something in him hesitated, and he answered. The voice on the other end was urgent, professional, yet strangely hopeful. They needed a blood donor immediately, a rare blood type. His blood type. A man's life was hanging by a thread, and Armin was one of the very few who could help. At first, Armin hesitated, not because he didn't want to help, but because he was exhausted, worried about leaving Mira alone, and unsure if he could afford to miss work the next day. But then he looked at his daughter, sleeping quietly, her tiny chest rising and falling with fragile breaths, new breaths. He thought about what it would feel like if she needed help and no one came. Within minutes, Armin made his decision. He wrapped Mira in a blanket, carried her to their neighbor's apartment, and asked for a favor he hated asking. Then, without wasting another second, he rushed to the hospital. The emergency ward was buzzing with tension when he arrived. Doctors moved quickly, nurses exchanged urgent glances, and somewhere in the chaos, a life was slipping away. Armin didn't ask questions. He didn't need to know who the man was or why he mattered. All he knew was that someone needed help, and he could give it. The process was faster than he expected, but it drained him more than he imagined. As the blood flowed from his veins, he felt lightheaded, weak, but strangely at peace. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had done something that truly mattered. No one made a big deal out of it, no applause, no recognition. Just a quiet thank you from a nurse and a promise that he had saved a life. Armin nodded, too tired to speak, and made his way home before dawn, his body aching but his heart a little lighter. The next morning, Armin woke up late. His alarm hadn't gone off, or maybe he had been too exhausted to hear it. Panic surged through him as he realized he had missed work. Another day's wage gone, another step closer to losing everything. But before he could even process the consequences, there was a knock at the door. It was firm, confident, unlike anything he'd ever heard at his door before. Armin opened it cautiously, half expecting bad news. But what he saw left him speechless. Standing outside were two men in formal suits, their posture straight, their expressions serious yet respectful. Behind them was a sleek black car, the kind Armin had only seen in movies. For a moment, he thought there must be some mistake. They asked for him by name. They told him that the man he had saved the night before was not just anyone. He was a powerful businessman, a millionaire known for his vast empire and influence. The doctors had said there was almost no hope, that without that specific blood type, he wouldn't survive. And then Armin had walked in. Armin listened in stunned silence, his mind struggling to catch up. He hadn't known. He hadn't asked. It hadn't mattered to him. The men explained that the businessman had regained consciousness early that morning. His first request had been to find the man who saved him, to thank him personally. Armin hesitated. He looked around his small, worn-out home, suddenly aware of every crack, every flaw. He looked at Mira sitting quietly in the corner, watching everything with curious eyes. He didn't belong in their world. He was just a laborer, a struggling father trying to survive. But something in the men's tone convinced him to go. When Armand stepped into the hospital room, everything felt different from the night before. The chaos was gone, replaced by silence and luxury. The man lying in the bed looked weak but alive, his presence commanding even in vulnerability. Their eyes met, and for a moment, no words were needed. The millionaire reached out, his hand trembling, and Armand instinctively stepped forward. There was gratitude in that grip. Deep, genuine, and overwhelming. It wasn't the kind of gratitude that could be expressed with money or words alone. It was the kind that came from knowing your life had been given back to you. Armand tried to brush it off, to say that anyone would have done the same. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Many would have hesitated. Many would have walked away. Days passed, and life seemed to return to normal, or at least as normal as it could be. Armand went back to work. Mira continued her quiet battle with illness. The hospital visit began to feel like a distant memory, almost like a dream. But then things began to change. It started small. A call from the hospital informing him that Mira's treatment would now be fully covered. Then a visit from a representative offering him a stable job, one that paid more than he had ever earned. Then an envelope arrived at his door containing documents that he could barely understand. But one thing was clear, his life was no longer the same. The man he had saved had kept his promise, not out of obligation, but out of respect, out of recognition for a kindness that had come without expectation. For the first time in years, Armand felt hope. Not the fragile kind that disappears at the first sign of trouble, but the kind that stays, that grows, that changes everything. Mira's health began to improve with proper treatment. Her laughter returned, filling their new home, a place they could finally call their own. Armand no longer had to choose between food and medicine, between survival and dignity. But the biggest change wasn't in their circumstances. It was in Armand himself. He realized that the night he chose to help a stranger, he hadn't just saved a life, he had changed his own. Because kindness has a way of coming back, sometimes when you least expect it, in ways you could never imagine. And now, before we reach the end of this story, I have a special request for you. Comment the word "a kindness" below if you believe that even the smallest good deed can create miracles. As the years went by, Armand never forgot where he came from. He continued to help others whenever he could, often quietly, without seeking recognition. Because he understood something that many people spend their entire lives trying to learn. That true wealth isn't measured in money. It's measured in the lives you touch, the hope you give, and the love you leave behind. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you believe even a little more in humanity, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness. Because sometimes one small act is all it takes to change everything. The change in Armand's life did not come like a sudden storm. It came like the sunrise, slow, steady, and almost unbelievable at first. Even weeks later, he would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, afraid that everything had been a dream. He would sit up, look around at the clean walls of their new home, the soft glow of a bedside lamp, and then at Mira, sleeping peacefully, her cheeks no longer pale, and only then would he breathe again. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. One evening, as Armand returned home from his new job, he found Mira sitting quietly by the window, staring out into the distance. There was something different about her that day. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of deep thought that children her age rarely carried. He sat beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She leaned into him, resting her head against his arm. She had been thinking about her mother. It had been years, but grief doesn't follow a timeline. It hides in quiet corners and returns when least expected. Mira asked questions Armand had no easy answers for, about why her mother had to leave, about why life had been so hard for them. Armand didn't try to explain everything. Instead, he told her something simple, something true. He told her that even though life had taken things away from them, it had also given them something powerful, the ability to understand pain, to feel deeply, and to help others who were hurting. And in that moment, something shifted inside him again. He realized that the second chance he had been given wasn't just about comfort or stability. It was about purpose. The very next week, Armin did something unexpected. He went back to the hospital, not as a donor this time, but as a volunteer. At first, it felt strange. Walking through those halls again brought back memories of fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion. But now, instead of being overwhelmed, he felt a quiet strength. He began spending his free time helping patients, talking to those who had no visitors, assisting nurses, comforting families who were waiting for news. He didn't have medical knowledge, but he had something just as valuable: empathy. People noticed. Doctors noticed how patients seemed calm around him. Nurses appreciated the way he stepped in without being asked. Families found comfort in his presence, in the way he listened without judgment. And slowly, without even realizing it, Armin became more than just a volunteer. He became a source of hope. Meanwhile, the millionaire whose life he had saved, Mr. Khanna, continued to stay in touch. But what surprised Armin the most was not the financial help or the job opportunity. It was the friendship that began to grow between them. Mr. Khanna, despite his wealth, had lived a life surrounded by transactions, not connections. People respected him, feared him, depended on him, but very few truly cared about him. Armin was different. He didn't treat him like a powerful man. He treated him like a human being. They would sit together sometimes, sharing simple conversations about life, about loss, about the strange ways in which fate brings people together. And in those moments, both men found something they hadn't expected: peace. But just when everything seemed to settle into a rhythm, life presented another challenge. One afternoon, Armin received a call from the hospital that made his heart drop. Mira had collapsed at school. The world around him blurred as he rushed to the hospital, fear gripping him tighter than ever before. All the old anxieties came rushing back: the helplessness, the dread, the feeling that everything he loved could be taken away in an instant. When he finally reached her room, she was conscious, but weak. The doctors explained that her condition, though improved, still required careful monitoring. She had pushed herself too hard, trying to live like other children, forgetting that her body was still healing. Armin sat by her side, holding her hand just like he had held a stranger's hand weeks ago. Only this time, the fear was deeper. This wasn't just a life, it was his world. And in that quiet, fragile moment, something incredible happened. Mr. Khanna walked into the room. Not with his usual composed presence, but with genuine concern. He had heard what happened and came immediately. He spoke to the doctors personally, ensured that Mira would receive the best care possible, and stayed longer than Armin expected, long enough to remind him that he wasn't alone anymore. That night, as Armin sat beside his daughter watching her sleep, he realized something profound. The kindness he had shown had not just returned to him, it had multiplied. It had created a chain of compassion that extended far beyond one moment, one decision, one life. Days later, Mira recovered again, stronger and more careful this time. And as she returned home, she carried something new within her: a quiet understanding of what her father had done and what it meant. She began to ask if she could go with him to the hospital. At first, Armin hesitated. She was still young, still recovering, but there was determination in her eyes, a reflection of his own. So he agreed, and together they started visiting patients. A little girl with a gentle smile, holding the hands of strangers, bringing warmth into cold hospital rooms. It was something no one could ignore. People who had lost hope began to smile again, not because their pain had disappeared, but because they felt seen. And Armin, watching his daughter grow into someone so compassionate, felt a kind of pride that no amount of money could ever replace. Years passed, but the story never faded. Armin continued to work, to help, to give. Mira grew stronger, healthier, and wiser beyond her years. And Mr. Khanna remained a part of their lives, not as a benefactor, but as family. Because sometimes life doesn't just change, it transforms. It takes the broken pieces, the sleepless nights, the silent sacrifices, and turns them into something meaningful. And now, as we come to the end of this story, if it touched your heart even a little, if it made you believe that kindness still exists in this world, Take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories like this. Because your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most. And remember this, you don't need to be rich to change someone's life. You don't need power or status or perfect timing. Sometimes all it takes is a single moment of kindness, and that moment can echo forever.